The sunlight glinted off the glass cabinets of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across the centuries of royal history. The palace, home to the British monarchy, was a symbol of power, tradition, and secrets buried deep within its walls. But among its treasures, none held as much mystery as the jewelry of Princess Diana. It wasn't just a collection of diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. It was a trove of emotions, stories, and symbols of a life lived under the harsh spotlight of the world's attention. Among those who would eventually inherit Diana's legacy, one person's discovery would ignite a firestorm of speculation and hidden truths: Princess Anne. On a quiet afternoon, as she perused her late sister-in-law's belongings, something in Diana's jewelry box caught Anne's eye. It wasn't just another piece of glittering royal adornment. It was a ring, an engagement ring, but not the one Charles had given Diana. The more she looked at it, the more she realized something that left her heart pounding. This was no ordinary piece of jewelry. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Anne knew every detail of Diana's life, or so she thought. She had seen the iconic sapphire engagement ring that Charles had given to Diana, a piece that had been the focal point of every royal photo, every media frenzy. But this was different. This ring, small and delicate, didn't match the one Diana had worn with such pride. The gold was subtler, the design more intricate, the gemstone different, a deep red hue that hinted at something far more passionate than the royal obligations that had defined Diana's public life. What could it mean? Was this some kind of error, a mistake in the way Diana had stored her possessions? Or was it something far more personal, far more intimate than anyone had imagined? As Anne continued to examine the ring, her mind began to race. Was it possible? Could this ring have been given to Diana by someone else? Someone she loved in secret? Someone who was never part of the public story? Someone whose name had never been whispered in the tabloids? The truth, buried beneath layers of royal protocol and public personas, was about to come to light in a way no one could have predicted. What Anne would discover that day would not only alter her perception of Diana's life, but would challenge everything the royal family had worked so hard to protect. The stories, the rumors, and the whispers about Diana's personal life, all of them were suddenly brought into sharp, undeniable focus. As the details unfolded, the pieces of the puzzle started to align. It wasn't just about a ring. It was about a life full of untold stories, broken hearts, and secret romances that the world would never truly know. And for Anne, the discovery of this ring was just the beginning. What Anne held in her hand was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was the key to unraveling a mystery that had long been whispered about, but never confirmed. Princess Diana, the woman who had captured the hearts of millions, the woman who had been both adored and vilified by the press, had left behind more than just a legacy of charity work and heartbreak. She had left behind a collection of deeply personal symbols, each one telling a story that no one had ever dared to reveal. As Anne pondered the significance of the ring, her emotions were in turmoil. Diana had always been an enigma, someone who had suffered deeply in her marriage to Prince Charles, someone who had been at the center of countless media storms. But despite the heartbreak and public scrutiny, there had always been whispers that Diana had loved another man. For years, rumors had swirled about secret lovers, about a passionate affair that Diana had kept hidden from the world. Some said it was James Hewitt, the cavalry officer with whom Diana had been rumored to have had an affair during her marriage. Others speculated about different men, names that were never confirmed, but whose stories lingered like smoke in the air. But this ring, this small, delicate piece of jewelry, seemed to be the final piece of evidence that could put those rumors to rest. As Anne turned the ring over in her hands, she wondered, could this have been a token of Diana's secret love? Was this ring a gift from someone who had touched Diana's heart in ways that Charles never had? The thought was both heartbreaking and electrifying. If it was true, it would mean that Diana had lived a life filled with love, passion, and betrayal, feelings that were so often hidden behind the walls of the royal family. Anne's mind raced through the possibilities. What had Diana been thinking when she kept the ring? Had she intended to reveal it at some point, or had she kept it as a quiet reminder of a love she could never openly acknowledge? And if this ring had truly belonged to someone else, who was that person? Could it have been James Hewitt, The man whose name had been tied to Diana in the press for years? Or was there another, even more surprising love story that had remained hidden from the public eye? The more Anne thought about it, the more the weight of the discovery settled in. This wasn't just about a piece of jewelry. It was about Diana's truth, her real story, the one she had kept locked away from the world. And now, in her hands, and was holding the key to unlocking it. But Anne wasn't just a passive observer in this moment. She was a participant. As a member of the royal family, she had a responsibility to protect the family's image, to uphold the royal narrative that had been so carefully crafted over the years. The discovery of this ring, if it became public, would be a bombshell. It would cast a shadow over Diana's legacy, and by extension, the royal family itself. Could Anne keep the secret? Could she live with the knowledge that Diana had a love life so far removed from the public's perception? Or would Anne be forced to confront the truth, no matter the consequences? As the realization began to sink in, Anne faced an impossible choice. Should she protect her late sister-in-law's reputation by keeping the secret buried, or should she risk everything and reveal the truth? The emotional stakes were high. For Anne, it wasn't just about the royal family's public image. It was about her own sense of loyalty, truth, and love for a sister-in-law who had suffered in silence. In the end, it wasn't just about the ring. It was about the legacy of a woman who had been both the world's princess and a deeply private individual. It was about the love and loss that Diana had experienced, the complex web of relationships she had navigated behind closed doors. And it was about the unspoken emotions that Anne had never fully understood until this moment. As Anne carefully placed the ring back in its box, her heart heavy with the weight of the truth she had uncovered, she knew one thing for certain. Diana's life was far more complicated, far more tragic, and far more romantic than anyone had ever imagined. And now, the world was about to find out just how deep that love truly ran. Kensington Palace had long been the setting for royal history, its walls filled with echoes of triumph and tragedy. Yet, on this particular afternoon, the quiet that hung in the air was almost unnerving. Princess Anne stood alone in the private chambers where her late sister-in-law's belongings were being carefully sorted through. The task before her was one of immense significance. Going through Diana's personal items, preserving her memory, and making decisions on what to keep and what to part with. But it wasn't just the normal things that Anne was grappling with. It was the pieces of Diana's soul, locked away in the most intimate corners of her life. Diana's jewelry box sat on the small wooden vanity, an unassuming yet incredibly valuable collection. There were necklaces, brooches, and rings, all items gifted to her by world leaders, loved ones, and, of course, her husband, Charles. Some of these pieces had been seen in public over the years, their stories intertwined with Diana's own. The sapphire engagement ring, the pearl earrings from Prince Charles, the diamond bracelet given to her by the Queen. Each piece had its own place in the royal story, its own role in the public narrative of Diana's life. Anne's hands trembled slightly as she opened the velvet-lined box. The familiar weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders. This was more than a simple sorting of possessions. It was the preservation of Diana's legacy, a legacy that was as complex as it was beloved. But as Anne lifted the delicate items one by one, examining them, something caught her eye, a piece she hadn't expected to see. Tucked in the farthest corner of the box, almost as if it had been placed there deliberately to be hidden, was a small, unmarked ring. At first glance, it appeared ordinary. The gold was soft, well-worn, and the stone, a deep, ruby-red hue, glowed faintly in the dim light of the room. Anne could feel her pulse quicken as she held it in her fingers, turning it over carefully. She was no stranger to royal jewelry, having seen countless pieces in her own family's vault. Yet, there was something profoundly different about this one. The design was elegant, understated, and intimate in a way that felt almost foreign in the world of opulent royal treasures. Her first thought was that it might be another gift from Charles, one that had slipped through the cracks of memory. But as she examined it closer, Anne's stomach dropped. This was not the ring Charles had given Diana. It wasn't just the appearance of the ring, it was the feeling it invoked. A quiet, almost sorrowful energy radiated from the piece. Anne's mind began to race. She knew Diana's jewelry collection intimately, from the most extravagant gifts to the quiet tokens of affection that had been exchanged between her and Charles. She knew the stories behind every piece. But this ring, it was unfamiliar, a complete mystery. The questions began to swirl around her, louder than the echo of her own thoughts. Where had it come from? Who had given it to Diana? And why had she kept it? Anne's fingers tightened around the ring, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from it. There was something deeply personal about it, something that suggested a connection far more intimate than the one between Diana and her estranged husband. The design, simple yet elegant, was reminiscent of the rings often exchanged in secret love affairs, not a public symbol of royalty, but a private promise, a memento of a romance hidden from the world. The realization hit, and like a wave. This ring was not from Charles. And that thought alone opened up a floodgate of possibilities. Could it have been given to Diana by someone else? Someone who had stolen her heart in ways Charles never could? The thought was both heartbreaking and electrifying. For years, rumors had surrounded Diana's private life, whispers of affairs, of secret lovers, of passions that had remained behind closed doors, far from the ever-watchful eyes of the press. But this ring felt different. It wasn't a piece of jewelry meant for public display. It wasn't something Diana would have worn to a royal event, where it could be scrutinized by the world. It was personal, it was intimate, and it was hidden. Anne's mind began to wander down the path of those rumors. James Hewitt, the cavalry officer who had been linked to Diana in the press, was the name that immediately came to mind. For years, the media had speculated about their relationship, whether it was true, how deep it went, and whether it was a genuine love affair or just another royal scandal. Could this ring have come from him? Was this the evidence that many had long suspected but never had proof of? But Anne knew better than to jump to conclusions. She needed to understand more before she made any assumptions. She needed to uncover the truth, or at least some version of it, before she could act. As she carefully placed the ring back in its place in the jewelry box, Anne's heart was heavy with the weight of the discovery. It wasn't just about a piece of jewelry. It was about the truth behind Diana's life, the secrets she had kept hidden from the world. The next few days were filled with a quiet intensity, and couldn't stop thinking about the ring. What if Diana had loved another man? What if the press, the royal family, and the world had only seen one side of her, a side that was defined by her marriage to Charles, her role as the people's princess, but not by her personal heartache, her private desires, and her longing for a love that could never be? As the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, and couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled upon something far more significant than she had ever anticipated. Diana's life, full of so much public pain, had also been filled with moments of deep, unspoken love. And this ring, hidden away for so many years, was the key to unlocking a part of her heart that no one had ever seen, and knew she couldn't keep this discovery to herself forever. The questions that had been raised by the ring, by the mystery of its origin, could not go unanswered. The world would want to know the truth. But the question remained, was the truth something that Anne was ready to face? With the ring still nestled in the box, and stood at the precipice of a decision that would change everything. Would she keep the secret of Diana's hidden love, or would she be the one to reveal the truth that had remained locked away for so long? The weight of the decision was overwhelming, and Anne knew that whatever path she chose, the consequences would be far-reaching. But the truth, as Anne soon realized, was not something that could be hidden forever. And when it finally came to light, it would change not only the legacy of Princess Diana, but the very foundation of the royal family itself. Princess Anne's hand lingered over the jewelry box, the soft velvet lining catching the light as it reflected the hidden weight of secrets buried deep within. The more she thought about it, the more unsettled she became. The ring, small and delicate, was more than just an accessory. It was an enigma, a puzzle whose pieces seemed to fit nowhere in the royal narrative she had known her entire life. It didn't belong, not to the public image of Diana and Charles, not to the glamorous world of royalty, and certainly not to the story Anne had always believed about her late sister-in-law's life. The ring was unlike any piece Diana had worn before. The simplicity of its design stood in stark contrast to the more opulent and recognizable pieces in her collection. The color of the stone, a deep red that seemed to glow with an internal warmth, was the most striking feature. Diana had always favored sapphires, diamonds, and pearls, but this was different. It was as though the ring itself had a story to tell, a story that and had not yet fully uncovered. The first thought that entered Anne's mind was that it might have been another gift from Charles. Perhaps a lesser-known one, a simple gesture to show affection amidst the chaos of their marriage. But as she examined it more closely, her doubts grew. It didn't match Charles's taste or the lavishness of the gifts he had given Diana over the years. He had always favored grand, public gestures, a sprawling diamond necklace, a set of earrings for a royal event. But this ring felt entirely personal. Small, intimate, and undeniably different. As Anne traced the curve of the ring with her fingers, her mind started to race. Could it have been given to Diana by someone else? Someone who had known her heart in ways Charles never could? Someone who had loved Diana when the world was too consumed with its own judgments to notice the woman behind the princess? The possibility sent a shiver down Anne's spine. Could this ring be the key to unlocking a part of Diana's life that had remained hidden from the public eye? For years, the press had speculated about Diana's love life beyond her marriage to Charles. Some had whispered about James Hewitt, the cavalry officer with whom Diana had been romantically linked. Others had speculated about secret relationships, affairs that were never confirmed but continued to simmer beneath the surface. But no matter how much the world wanted to know, Diana had always kept her personal life a mystery. The ring in Anne's hand, however, seemed to be more than just a relic of that secrecy. It was a clue, a piece of evidence that suggested Diana's heart had belonged to someone else entirely. Anne closed her eyes for a moment, her thoughts swirling. She had spent years navigating the delicate balance of royal duty and personal life. But this felt different. Diana had been a public figure, yes, but she had also been a woman with her own desires, her own emotions, her own heartaches, and had seen it all. The public pain, the smiles for the cameras, the charitable work that had defined Diana's legacy. But this ring, the weight of it in her hand, suggested there was so much more beneath the surface that no one had ever truly understood. Was it possible that this ring had been given to Diana by a man who had truly loved her, but whose name had never appeared in the tabloids? Could it have been James Hewitt, the man whose name had been tied to Diana's in the press for years? Or was there someone else entirely? Someone who had kept their relationship with Diana so well hidden that even Anne, who had been close to her, had never suspected it? The more Anne thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to align. The ring's design, the hidden nature of its placement in Diana's jewelry box, it all pointed to something far more personal than Anne had ever considered. Diana had always been careful with what she allowed the world to see. The public had only been given a glimpse into her life, the parts that the palace had deemed acceptable, the parts that suited the royal image. But this ring, this piece of jewelry, suggested that Diana had lived a life that was far more complex, far more intimate than anyone had realized, and felt a mixture of emotions as she continued to turn the ring over in her fingers. There was disbelief, of course. How could Diana have kept something so significant hidden for so long? But there was also a sense of sadness, a deep, unspoken understanding of how difficult it must have been for Diana to live a life that was constantly under scrutiny. It was as though this ring represented not just a secret love, but the burden of being unable to love freely, to express herself without fear of judgment from the world. The longer Anne held the ring, the more the truth seemed to become clearer, yet more confusing at the same time. Was this the evidence that many had suspected but never confirmed? Was this the missing piece of the puzzle that would finally explain Diana's complicated, often heartbreaking life? In the weeks that followed, Anne found herself unable to shake the feeling that the ring was calling to her, urging her to uncover the truth. She couldn't simply let it sit in the jewelry box, a symbol of a life she didn't fully understand. The more she examined it, the more questions arose. Who was the man who had given it to Diana? What was the nature of their relationship? And why had Diana chosen to keep this part of her life so private, even after her death? And knew that revealing the truth about Diana's hidden love life would have profound consequences. The royal family had worked hard to maintain a particular image, one that was untarnished by scandal or betrayal. To uncover a secret love affair would shatter that image, creating ripples throughout the monarchy. But at the same time, Anne felt an undeniable pull to uncover the truth, not just for the sake of the family's legacy, but for the sake of Diana herself. As the days passed, Anne found herself increasingly obsessed with the ring, its origins, and the man who had given it to Diana. The mystery surrounding it seemed to consume her thoughts, and with each passing day, she grew more certain that this was a story that needed to be told, if not to the public, then at least to herself. The ring had uncovered a truth that was more complicated than she had ever imagined, and the only way to make sense of it was to understand the full story of Diana's life, the parts that had never been shared, the parts that had been hidden in plain sight. But who couldn't turn to? Who could she trust with such a delicate, potentially explosive secret? The weight of her responsibility was heavy, and the questions she faced were increasingly difficult to answer. Should she keep this truth hidden forever, or should she risk everything to reveal it to the world? As Anne's fingers traced the delicate band of the ring once more, she knew that the decision she would soon make would change everything. The world would never see Diana in the same way again, and neither would she. For years, the world had viewed Princess Diana through a lens of heartbreak and vulnerability. Her marriage to Prince Charles, filled with public moments of affection and private moments of tension, had been the subject of intense media scrutiny. The tabloids, eager to capitalize on the royal drama, relentlessly followed every move Diana made. From her charity work to her turbulent relationship with Charles, every detail of her life seemed to be laid bare for the world to see. Yet despite the constant press coverage, there was a side to Diana that remained elusive, a side that not even her closest family members fully understood. Behind the walls of Kensington Palace, in the quiet solitude of her private moments, Diana's heart had been torn between duty and desire. While she dutifully fulfilled her role as the people's princess, she also struggled with the suffocating reality of a marriage that had never fully embraced her for who she was. And though the public never saw it, Diana's heart had been claimed by someone other than Charles, someone whose name was not to be found in the royal records or the pages of the tabloids. As Anne stood in that room, staring at the ring in her hand, she couldn't help but wonder, who had Diana truly loved? Who had captured her heart in the way Charles never had? The whispers had always been there, subtle and unspoken, suggesting that Diana's heart had belonged to someone else entirely. But now, with this discovery, those whispers took on a new weight, a new urgency. The ring was no longer just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of a love story that had never been told, a love story that had remained hidden beneath the surface for years. And had always known that Diana's marriage to Charles had been less than perfect. Everyone had seen it, the tension in their interactions, the coldness that had developed between them over the years. But what the public didn't see, what the cameras couldn't capture, was the quiet pain Diana had endured. She had been a woman caught between two worlds, one of royal obligation and one of private longing. While she fulfilled her royal duties with grace and poise, her heart had always yearned for something more. Something that Charles, for all his faults, could never provide. It was in this space of emotional isolation that Diana had found solace in the arms of another. The rumors had swirled for years, whispers of an affair with James Hewitt, the cavalry officer whose name had become synonymous with scandal. The press had latched onto their relationship, painting it as the affair that would define Diana's life. But Anne knew better than anyone that the media often distorted the truth. The reality of Diana's relationships was far more complex, far more nuanced than the headlines ever let on. James Hewitt might have been one of Diana's loves, but he wasn't the only one. There were others, men whose names had never been connected to her in the public eye, but whose love and devotion had shaped her life in ways no one had ever imagined. The more Anne thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. The ring, with its delicate design and intimate symbolism, could very well have come from one of these men. It was a gift not meant for the public eye, not meant to be worn at royal events or photographed by the press. It was a piece of jewelry given in the quiet privacy of Diana's own world, a world that few had ever glimpsed. And if this ring was indeed a token of Diana's love for someone else, someone who was not Charles, then the implications were staggering. It would mean that Diana had lived a life full of secret passions and hidden romances, a life that had been carefully guarded from the world. The truth of Diana's relationships, long buried under the weight of royal duty, was beginning to come to light. The ring was a key to unlocking the mysteries of Diana's heart. But as Anne stood there, her fingers still holding the ring, a deep sense of unease began to settle in. She had always known that Diana's life had been far more complicated than the world realized. But to see it laid bare before her, to hold a piece of that hidden truth in her hands, was something else entirely. In the days that followed, Anne's thoughts were consumed by the ring and the questions it raised. Who was the man who had given it to Diana? Was it James Hewitt, the man whose name had been tied to her in the press for so long? Or was it someone else entirely? Someone whose relationship with Diana had remained hidden from the world? And couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was just within her reach. But the more she searched for it, the more elusive it became. The truth about Diana's love life was not just a personal matter. It was a royal matter, one that had the potential to shake the foundations of the monarchy itself. The royal family had long relied on its image of perfection, of a family united in duty and devotion. But Diana's life had been anything but perfect, and to reveal the true nature of her relationships would risk exposing the cracks in the royal facade. And understood the gravity of the situation. If she chose to reveal the truth about Diana's secret love life, the consequences would be far-reaching. The public's perception of Diana would change forever. The image of her as the world's beloved princess, the symbol of grace and poise, would be replaced by something far more human, far more complicated. But was that such a bad thing? Wasn't Diana entitled to her privacy, to her secrets, to her own personal love story? The more Anne thought about it, the more she realized that the decision wasn't just about protecting Diana's image, it was about honoring her legacy. Diana had been a woman who had given so much to the world, a woman whose heart had been broken by the very system that had placed her on a pedestal. She had been a symbol of hope and compassion, but she had also been a woman with her own needs, her own desires, her own heartaches. The world had seen only a fraction of who Diana truly was. The truth of her life, the truth of her love, had been buried beneath layers of royal protocol and media manipulation, and knew that by revealing the truth, she would be doing more than just telling a story about Diana's love life. She would be uncovering the complexity of a woman who had never fully been allowed to live on her own terms. Diana had been the world's princess, but she had also been a woman who had loved deeply and passionately. Someone who had been forced to hide that love for fear of scandal, for fear of tarnishing the royal family's image. And now, with this ring, Anne was holding the key to unlocking that truth. The ring was not just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of Diana's private world, a world that had never been allowed to surface. And as Anne stood there, contemplating the weight of the discovery, she knew that the decision before her was not just about a ring. It was about a legacy, a life, and a love that had been hidden from the world for far too long. Princess Anne stood in the quiet solitude of Diana's former bedroom, holding the ring in her hand, her fingers still trembling with the weight of the discovery. The room was filled with the faint scent of lavender and the soft hum of the palace outside. It felt strangely peaceful, yet Anne could not shake the disquiet that had settled deep in her chest. The ring she held was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a key to a part of Diana's life that had remained hidden from the world, a part that Anne had never fully understood. Her thoughts were a swirl of confusion, disbelief, and a strange sense of betrayal. Diana had always been an enigma to Anne, someone who had been both a beloved member of the royal family and a woman who had lived a life full of pain, sacrifice, and untold stories. And had seen Diana's public persona, the glamorous princess who charmed the world with her beauty and grace. But she had never truly understood the private woman behind the public image. Diana had always kept her personal life guarded, her heart locked away from the world, and had never imagined it was so complicated, so filled with secrets. As Anne turned the ring over in her hand, she couldn't help but wonder, what had Diana been thinking when she kept it? Had she intended to keep the secret hidden forever? Or had she, in some small way, wanted someone to uncover it, to understand the complexity of her emotions, her desires, and her heartache? The more Anne thought about it, the more she realized how little she had truly known about her sister-in-law, about the woman who had been both a royal icon and a tragic figure. Diana had been a woman who had loved deeply, a woman who had sought comfort and affection in a world that demanded she suppress her personal emotions for the sake of duty, and had always known that Diana's marriage to Charles had been difficult, but she had never fully grasped the extent of the emotional toll it had taken on her. The royal family had never been known for open displays of affection, but Diana had been different. She had worn her heart on her sleeve, and in doing so, she had invited both adoration and scrutiny from the public. Yet the love she truly sought, the love that could have healed her heart, had never been fully realized in her marriage to Charles. As Anne stood there, gazing at the ring, she felt a pang of sadness. The ring represented something Diana had never fully had, a love that was entirely her own. It was a reminder of the depth of Diana's emotional isolation, of the love that had been denied her in the public eye, and could only imagine the pain Diana must have felt, knowing that the love she sought would never be fully accepted, would never be allowed to flourish in the way it should have. But it wasn't just sadness that Anne felt, it was also a deep sense of empathy. She could understand, perhaps better than anyone else, the weight of Diana's emotions, and had always been close to her family, yet she had often been an outsider in the world of royal duties and expectations. Her relationship with Charles had been fraught with its own challenges, and she had often felt the weight of being part of a family that was defined by tradition, by public appearances, and by a strict code of behavior. Diana had been the same, and yet she had suffered in a way that Anne could never have imagined. The truth about Diana's secret love life, hidden for so long, had left Anne feeling conflicted. On one hand, she understood the need for privacy, the desire to keep one's personal life shielded from the glare of the media. But on the other hand, Anne couldn't help but feel a sense of injustice. Diana had been robbed of a life of true happiness, a life where she could have freely loved and been loved in return. Instead, she had been trapped in a marriage that had never allowed her to be herself, to express her emotions without fear of reprisal. The royal family, for all its grandeur, had never been a place where Diana could have truly found peace. And now, with this ring, Anne saw that Diana had sought that peace elsewhere, away from the public eye, away from the scrutiny of the palace, and placed the ring gently back in the jewelry box, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what it represented. She knew that revealing the truth about Diana's secret love would be a difficult decision. It would shatter the carefully constructed narrative of Diana's life, the image that the royal family had worked so hard to maintain. But at the same time, Anne couldn't help but wonder if that was exactly what needed to happen. Diana's story had always been one of tragedy, but it was also a story of resilience, of a woman who had fought for her own happiness despite the odds stacked against her. Anne's mind turned to her own children, Peter and Zara, and to the future of the royal family. What would happen if the truth about Diana's love life came to light? How would it affect the family's image? Would the public view Diana differently, or would they finally see her as the complex, multidimensional woman she truly was? And couldn't help but think about the potential impact of such a revelation on her own relationship with the media and the public. The royal family was a symbol of tradition, of stability, but it was also a family of real people, with real emotions and real struggles. Diana had never been allowed to show that side of herself, and now, with this discovery, Anne found herself questioning whether it was time for the truth to be told. The emotional weight of the situation was undeniable, and was torn between her loyalty to the royal family, her desire to protect the family's image, and her deep respect for Diana as a woman who had been misunderstood and misrepresented for so long. The truth about Diana's love life was not just about scandal or gossip. It was about the life of a woman who had been denied the opportunity to live authentically, to love freely without fear of judgment or consequence. As Anne stood there, the ring resting in the jewelry box, she knew one thing for certain. Diana's story was far from over. The truth, however painful, had to be revealed. But how and when would Anne be the one to reveal it? And what would the consequences be for the royal family, for the legacy of Princess Diana, and for herself? For as long as Princess Diana had been in the public eye, rumors about her personal life had swirled like an unstoppable storm. The press, eager for scandal and sensationalism, had latched onto every whisper, every shadowy suggestion that there might be more to Diana's life than the world had been shown. From her tumultuous marriage to Prince Charles to her charitable work, Diana had become the most famous woman in the world. But behind her public persona was a woman who had been constantly scrutinized, judged, and often misunderstood. And within that scrutiny lay the seeds of rumors, some true, some false, but all equally tantalizing to a media hungry for anything that might disrupt the royal family's carefully crafted image. The whispers about Diana's relationships began almost as soon as her marriage to Charles had crumbled. The world knew that their union had been fraught with tension, but what the world didn't know was the extent of the emotional turmoil Diana had faced in private. The pain of being trapped in a loveless marriage, the pressure of being the perfect princess, and the loneliness she often felt in the public eye had pushed Diana into the arms of someone else. Or so the rumors went. James Hewitt, the cavalry officer who had captured the attention of both the press and the public, was the first man to be linked to Diana in the tabloids. Their alleged affair, which was said to have begun in the mid-1980s, was the stuff of headlines. Diana and James had met at a time when her marriage to Charles was on the rocks, and their relationship seemed to provide the kind of emotional support Diana desperately needed. For years, the public had been fascinated by the idea of Diana in the arms of another man, someone who seemed to understand her pain and offer her the love she had longed for. But while the rumors about their relationship had never been fully confirmed, they had never truly gone away either. They lingered, like an unspoken truth, waiting to be revealed. But James Hewitt was not the only man whose name had been associated with Diana. Over the years, other figures had entered the spotlight, each one fueling the fire of speculation. Some were well known, like the heartthrob actor Oliver Hoare, whose brief but passionate affair with Diana was said to have taken place shortly before her separation from Charles. Others were more elusive, their identities carefully guarded, their relationships with Diana kept in the shadows. As the years went on, the rumors grew more persistent. Every time Diana was seen with a man, whether in a public setting or in a private moment, the media would pounce. A lingering glance, a gentle touch, nothing was too small to escape the watchful eyes of the press. The tabloids reveled in the idea of Diana as a woman caught between two worlds, the dutiful wife and the passionate lover. The world had watched as Diana navigated her marriage to Charles, but few had truly seen the woman behind the princess. Few had understood the sacrifices she had made, the love she had lost, and the love she had found in unexpected places. But among all the rumors, one question remained unanswered. Who had truly held Diana's heart? The whispers about James Hewitt, Oliver Hoare, and the other men in Diana's life were tantalizing, but they left one crucial piece of the puzzle missing. The ring that Anne had discovered, the ring that did not belong to Charles, seemed to be the final clue. If it wasn't from Charles, then who had given it to Diana? And why had she kept it so carefully hidden? Anne's mind continued to churn with the possibilities. She had always known that Diana had struggled in her marriage to Charles, but the idea of a secret, passionate love affair, one that had been hidden from the public eye for so long, was something entirely different. The ring, small and delicate, seemed to confirm what the rumors had long suggested, that Diana had loved another man, someone who had been there for her in ways Charles could never be. But what did that mean for the royal family's carefully constructed narrative? The idea of Diana's secret lover was a bombshell, one that could shake the very foundation of the monarchy. The public had always viewed Diana as a tragic figure, a woman who had been wronged by her marriage to Charles and by the constraints of royal life. But what if there had been more to her story than anyone had realized? What if, in the midst of her public pain, Diana had found solace in the arms of someone else, someone who had loved her without the weight of royal duty hanging over them, and knew that revealing the truth about Diana's relationships would not be easy? The royal family had spent years carefully protecting their image, maintaining a facade of unity and decorum. To uncover a secret love affair would be to expose the cracks in that facade, to challenge the carefully curated narrative that had been presented to the world. But as Anne sat there, staring at the ring in her hand, she couldn't help but wonder if it was time for the truth to come out. Diana had lived a life filled with secrets, but those secrets were part of the woman she had been. They were part of the story that had never been told. The more Anne thought about it, the more she realized that the whispers about Diana's love life, the rumors that had swirled for years, were not just idle gossip. They were the key to understanding Diana as a person, not just as a princess. Diana had been a woman who had loved, who had experienced joy and heartbreak, who had been both a symbol of grace and a woman with real human emotions. The ring in Anne's hand was a reminder of that complexity, a reminder that Diana's story had never been fully understood. But the truth came with a cost. To reveal Diana's secret love would change everything. It would change how the public viewed Diana, how they saw her legacy, and how the royal family was perceived. The truth would shatter the carefully constructed image of the monarchy, exposing the raw, unfiltered reality of Diana's life. And knew that the decision she faced was not just about revealing a secret. It was about honoring Diana's legacy and allowing her story to be told in full, without the filter of royal expectations or media distortion. The woman Diana had been, the love she had felt, and the pain she had endured deserved to be understood, not just by the public, but by those closest to her. The ring, though small, held the weight of that understanding, and Anne knew that by holding it, she was standing on the edge of a truth that could change everything. Princess Anne sat quietly in the sitting room, staring at the ring once again, this time under the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. The room was still, and the weight of the moment seemed to hang in the air like a thick fog. As the shadows of evening began to stretch across the walls, Anne felt an almost suffocating sense of responsibility pressing down on her. The discovery of the ring had set in motion a series of emotions and thoughts she wasn't entirely prepared for, emotions she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. The more she held the ring, the more her mind spun with the implications of what it meant. It was more than just an object of beauty. It was a symbol of Diana's private life, one that had remained hidden for so long. The ring was a piece of the puzzle, a clue to understanding Diana's heart in ways the world had never known. But as Anne sat there, her thoughts conflicted. She knew that the ring was also a burden. It was a burden of truth, a truth that threatened to unravel the carefully crafted image of the royal family, the image they had spent decades maintaining. The decision she now faced was one of monumental importance. Should she reveal the truth about Diana's secret love life, or should she keep it buried, protecting the legacy of the family and the royal image that had been so carefully preserved? It wasn't a simple decision. The world had always viewed Diana as a tragic figure, a woman who had been wronged by her marriage to Charles and by the strict constraints of royal life. But what if the truth about Diana's heart, her secret loves, was something far more complex and painful than the public ever imagined? What if, by exposing that truth, she risked not only the royal family's reputation, but the very legacy Diana had left behind? Anne's loyalty to her family was unquestionable. She had always been a dutiful member of the royal family, one who understood the delicate balance between personal truth and public duty. She had watched her brother Charles endure public scrutiny for years, and she knew how much the monarchy depended on maintaining an image of stability, unity, and perfection. But Anne also knew that Diana's life had been filled with more than just royal duties and public appearances. Diana had been a woman with real feelings, real desires, and real heartbreaks. And now, with the discovery of this ring, Anne realized that the truth of Diana's private life was something the world needed to see, not just to understand Diana, but to understand the complexities of the royal family itself. For a long moment, Anne's eyes lingered on the ring, its deep red stone seeming to glow with an inner fire. What did it represent? What was its true significance in the grand story of Diana's life? She had seen Diana's pain, seen the toll that royal life had taken on her. But had she ever truly understood the extent of it? Had Diana been able to love freely, to experience the kind of intimacy that so many women take for granted, or had she been trapped in a marriage that stifled her emotional needs, her desires, her very being? The more Anne thought about it, the more she realized that Diana's life had never been just about the public image, the royal duties, the charity work. It had been about something deeper. Diana had been a woman who had felt deeply, who had loved with everything she had, and yet had been forced to hide that love from the world. The ring represented that hidden love, that secret, and it was a reminder of the many sacrifices Diana had made for the sake of the monarchy and her role as the people's princess. But at what cost? What had Diana given up to maintain that image, and what had she kept hidden from the world? And closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She knew that revealing the truth would come with consequences. The royal family had always prided itself on its image of unity and dignity, but to expose the truth about Diana's secret love would disrupt that image forever. The press would descend like vultures, hungry for scandal, for drama, for anything that would feed the insatiable public appetite. The monarchy, which had been built on centuries of tradition and respect, would be forced to confront the reality of its own imperfections. And wasn't sure if the royal family, or even the public, was ready for that kind of truth. But as Anne sat there, holding the ring, she couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility to Diana. Diana had been a woman who had lived a life of immense public scrutiny, a woman whose every move had been watched and analyzed by the world. Diana had been a symbol of grace, beauty, and vulnerability, but she had also been a woman who had suffered in silence. She had loved deeply and passionately, but those loves had been hidden away, tucked behind the walls of the royal palace. Diana had never been given the freedom to love openly, to be herself without fear of judgment. And now, as her legacy was being sorted through by Anne, the truth about that love was staring her in the face. Anne's heart ached as she thought about the woman her sister-in-law had been. Diana had been more than just a royal icon. She had been a real person, someone who had experienced heartache, betrayal, and loneliness just like anyone else. And yet, despite it all, Diana had never been allowed to show that side of herself to the world. She had been trapped by her role, by the expectations placed upon her as a member of the royal family. The ring in Anne's hand was a symbol of that captivity, but it was also a symbol of something more, of the love Diana had sought and the love she had found, even if it was only for a brief moment, in the arms of someone who truly understood her. The decision before Anne was a difficult one, but it was one that would define not only her own future, but also the legacy of Diana and the royal family. Should she protect the image of the monarchy and keep the truth hidden, or should she expose the reality of Diana's life, no matter the consequences? Should she reveal the hidden love that Diana had kept so carefully concealed, or should she honor her sister-in-law's memory by keeping that secret buried forever? In the end, Anne knew there would be no easy answer. The truth about Diana's love life would never be simple, and neither would the consequences of revealing it. But as Anne sat there, the ring resting in her hand, she knew that the time had come to make a decision. The world had always seen Diana as the Princess of Hearts, the woman who had captured the world's affection. But now, with this discovery, Anne realized that Diana's heart had belonged to more than just the people. It had belonged to someone who had loved her in a way that no one else had ever been able to. And perhaps, in the end, that was the greatest legacy Diana could leave behind. Not just the image of a princess, but the truth of a woman who had loved deeply and lived a life of complexity, secrecy, and passion. The question now was whether Anne would be the one to reveal it. The days following Anne's discovery were heavy with anticipation. The silence that had settled over Kensington Palace in the wake of the revelation was almost unbearable. Princess Anne had spent countless hours in reflection, grappling with the immense weight of the secret she now carried. Diana's ring, hidden away for so long, had unlocked a world of untold stories, of passions and secrets that no one, least of all the public, had ever seen. The ring had become more than just an object. It had become a symbol of a life lived behind closed doors, a life that was far more complex than the world had ever imagined. And knew that the moment she chose to reveal this secret, everything would change. The royal family's carefully maintained image, the narrative of perfection and unity, would be shattered. The public, who had once viewed Diana as the tragic princess, would see her in a new light. One that blurred the lines between royalty and humanity, between duty and desire. The scandal would be monumental, but what other choice did Anne have? Diana had been a woman who had suffered in silence, a woman who had never been allowed to live authentically. The truth about her secret love, her hidden desires, deserved to be told. But as Anne paced back and forth in her private chambers, doubt crept in. Could she really expose Diana's truth? Could she risk everything for the sake of transparency, knowing the consequences it would have for the royal family? The question gnawed at her. Was it worth it? Diana had lived a life of public heartbreak, and now Anne was faced with the task of revealing even more of that private pain. How would Charles react? How would the rest of the royal family react? The questions piled up, and yet, Anne knew deep down that revealing the truth was the only way to truly honor Diana's legacy. The world was, as always, watching. The royal family was under constant scrutiny, every move dissected by the press, every word analyzed by the public. The royal machine had spent years crafting an image of perfection, of unwavering loyalty and decorum. But this was different. This was about love, real, raw love, and it was a story that couldn't be ignored any longer. Diana had been more than just a figurehead, more than just a symbol of charity. She had been a woman with a heart, with needs, with desires that were never fully met. The ring in Anne's hand was the key to unlocking that truth. The media, of course, was already buzzing with speculation. The press had always been obsessed with Diana's personal life, and now, with whispers of a secret love affair, the speculation reached fever pitch, and could almost hear the headlines being written in real time. Diana's hidden love, the secret that shook the monarchy, Princess Diana's affair exposed. A love the world never knew, and, of course, reveals Diana's most intimate secret. The royal family would no longer be able to control the narrative, and Anne knew that the fallout would be swift and unforgiving. But beyond the scandal, Anne couldn't ignore the humanity of it all. Diana had been a woman who had lived under the weight of expectations, who had been forced to sacrifice her own happiness for the sake of the monarchy. She had been a princess, yes, but she had also been a woman who had been betrayed, who had loved deeply, and who had suffered in silence. The truth about her hidden romance was not just a scandal. It was a revelation of the woman behind the crown, the woman who had been lost in the public's obsession with the royal image. As Anne thought about how to move forward, she realized that the decision was not just about exposing the truth. It was about understanding Diana as a person, as a woman who had been complex, flawed, and beautiful in ways that the world could never fully understand. The royal family had always been portrayed as a perfect institution, an unblemished symbol of power and tradition. But the truth was more complicated than that. Diana's love story, her secret affair, was a part of her truth that deserved to be acknowledged. The first person Anne needed to confront was Charles. He was the one who had been at the center of Diana's pain, the one whose betrayal had driven her into the arms of another. How would he react when Anne revealed the truth? Would he deny it? Or would he finally admit to the emotional distance that had defined their relationship for so long? Anne's relationship with her brother was already strained, but this could push things to a breaking point. Yet, in the end, Anne knew that she couldn't keep the truth hidden any longer. Diana's story was not just her own, it was the royal family's story as well. The royal family, for all its grandeur, was made up of real people, people with hearts, with emotions, with stories that were often more complicated than the public knew. And Diana's story was one that needed to be told, one that needed to be understood. She had been a woman who had lived with a broken heart, who had been forced to carry the weight of her role as princess while longing for something more. And now, with the discovery of the ring, Anne knew that the time had come to finally let the world see Diana for who she truly was. The media, once the enemy, would now be Anne's ally in this difficult journey. The press had been the one to expose so many of Diana's personal struggles, but this time, they would help and tell her story. The truth about Diana's love life would not be hidden any longer. The world would know the reality of who she had been, who she had loved, and how much she had sacrificed in the name of duty. But the question remained, what would the fallout be? The scandal would be monumental. The royal family would have to confront the reality of Diana's secret life, and the public would have to come to terms with the truth about the woman they had all admired and loved. But in the end, Anne knew that the truth was worth the consequences. Diana had been a woman who had never truly been allowed to live on her own terms, and it was time for her to be seen for who she truly was. For years, the public had seen only the surface of Princess Diana's life. The carefully crafted image of the people's princess was a product of the royal family's control over the narrative, the delicate balance between personal struggles and public appearances. Diana had been adored by millions, admired for her grace, her charitable work, and the empathy she brought to the royal family. But there was more to her story, a story that had never been told, a side of her that had been kept hidden from the world. And, standing in the quiet of Diana's former bedroom, could feel the weight of that hidden life pressing down on her. The ring in her hand, now a symbol of Diana's secret world, was a silent testament to a love that had never been allowed to flourish in the open. Diana had been a woman caught between two worlds, the world of duty and expectation, and the world of personal longing, of desires that were never fully realized. The life she had lived had been full of contradictions, of love and heartbreak, of happiness and pain. Diana had been a woman who had never fully belonged to herself. As a member of the royal family, she had been bound by the constraints of tradition, of protocol, and of the public's unyielding gaze. The press had followed her every move, scrutinizing her relationships, her emotions, and her choices. And while Diana had always been open and honest in her charity work, her personal life had been a carefully guarded secret. What the world didn't know was that Diana had loved and been loved in ways that the public could never have imagined, and could remember, in vivid detail, the toll that the royal life had taken on her sister-in-law. Diana had been a woman who had experienced immense pain, both in her marriage to Charles and in her role as a member of the royal family. The world had witnessed her struggles with her eating disorder, her battles with mental health, and her public breakdowns. But what the world hadn't seen were the quiet moments of sadness, the times when Diana had been alone with her thoughts, feeling the weight of the expectations placed on her shoulders. Diana had been a woman who had been forced to carry a burden that no one could truly understand. Behind the scenes, Diana had sought comfort in her relationships with men, and not just Charles. James Hewitt, whose name had been linked to Diana in the press for years, was the first to be publicly associated with her during her marriage. The affair, though never fully confirmed in the public eye, had been the subject of constant speculation. The media had painted James as the villain, the man who had broken up Diana's marriage, but knew that the reality was far more complicated. Diana had been lonely, isolated, and searching for someone who could understand her pain. James had provided her with that comfort, but he had been just one chapter in a much larger, more complex story. As Anne sat in the silence of Diana's room, she began to understand the depth of the woman her sister-in-law had been. Diana had been more than just a princess. She had been a mother, a wife, a lover, and, at times, a woman searching for something more. She had loved fiercely, but the world had never allowed her to love freely. Every relationship Diana had been a part of, whether it was with Charles, with James, or with other men, had been subject to the scrutiny of the press. The pressure had been unbearable, and Diana had been forced to hide parts of herself, to conceal her true emotions behind the mask of royalty. The ring, held in her hand, was a symbol of that hidden life. It was a piece of jewelry that Diana had kept close to her, a token of a love that had been kept secret from the world. But why? Why had Diana chosen to keep it hidden? Was it out of fear of scandal? Or had Diana been protecting something deeper, something more personal than anyone could have known? The truth was, Diana had never been able to fully express herself. She had never been able to love without fear of the consequences. Her marriage to Charles had been one of duty, of political convenience, and of public expectation. It had been a marriage that had never allowed Diana to truly be herself, to express her needs, to find the love and affection she had longed for. And when that love had come, first in the form of James Hewitt, and later in other relationships, Diana had been forced to keep it hidden. The royal family and the press would never have allowed her the freedom to love openly. As Anne thought about the ring, she began to realize that the secrets it held were not just about Diana's love life. They were about Diana's entire existence, about the life she had lived in the shadows. The world had only seen what it had wanted to see: the perfect princess, the loving mother, the charity icon. But there was so much more to Diana than the world had ever known. She had been a woman with her own desires, her own heartaches, her own journey. And this ring, this small, intimate object, was a piece of that journey. The more Anne reflected on Diana's life, the more she realized that the ring was not just a symbol of Diana's love for another man. It was a symbol of everything Diana had been forced to sacrifice. It was a reminder of the emotional cost of being a part of the royal family, of the toll that public life had taken on Diana's soul. Diana had been a woman who had been forced to suppress her emotions, to hide her true self behind the mask of royalty. And now, with this ring, Anne was beginning to understand the depth of that sacrifice. In many ways, Diana's hidden life had been a tragedy. She had never been allowed to fully live, to fully love, to fully express who she truly was. The royal family had demanded perfection, and in doing so, they had robbed Diana of the chance to be her authentic self. The ring, though small, represented all of the emotions Diana had been forced to hide. It was a symbol of a love that had been kept secret, of a life that had been lived in the shadows. And now, with the discovery of the ring, and realized that it was time for the truth to come to light, the world needed to understand the real Diana, the woman behind the princess, the heartbroken soul who had been forced to live in a world of expectations and sacrifice.